Committee will come to order. Today we are going to dive into reckless and wasteful spending of our federal government, particularly when it comes to foreign aid. The United States should not be the sugar daddy for the entire world, especially not for countries and organizations who act contrary to our nation's beliefs. Our country is $36 trillion in debt, yet we continue to send billions of dollars overseas, often funding projects that are not just useless, but in many cases actively harmful. Taking the path to fiscal
Hey
responsibility.
everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a huge issue that affects every single taxpayer in the U.S. wasteful government spending, specifically when it comes to foreign aid. Senator Rand Paul recently exposed some truly shocking examples of where your tax dollars are going overseas, and believe me, it's not pretty. We're talking about millions of dollars being spent on things like fashion shows, drag theater, and even funding organizations that actively work against American interests. All while the U.S. is drowning in $36 trillion of debt. So before we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates on this topic. Let's get into it. Let's start with the most mind-boggling examples. Senator Paul highlighted a number of instances where USAID, which is supposed to be helping other nations, is instead funding projects that make absolutely no sense. For example, $4.8 million was given to Ukraine's Public Affairs Office to fund social media influencers. Instead of using that money to protect our border, it was spent on promoting content online in another country. Crazy, right? And it doesn't stop there. $2.1 million was sent to Paraguay to enhance their border security. Why are we funding border security in other countries when our own southern border is in crisis? It makes no sense. Next up, we have some truly bizarre spending when it comes to gender identity programs. USAID spent $2 million in Guatemala on transgender surgeries, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming care. In a country where so many people are struggling to meet basic needs, is this really the best use of U.S. taxpayer money? Then there's $25,000 spent to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Yes, you heard that right, a transgender opera in Colombia. Where is the accountability in this kind of spending? How does this help American diplomacy or foreign relations in any meaningful way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. USAID has also funded projects that seem completely disconnected from diplomacy and international relations.
Harmful.
In Brazil.
Taking the path to fiscal responsibility is often a lonely journey, but thanks to Elon Musk and Doge, they've brought to light the waste that I've been highlighting for over the last decade. Every year I release my Festivus report to expose the ridiculous spending of the federal government, and this past year was no exception. I uncovered over $1 trillion in government waste, with the State Department and USAID being some of the worst offenders. Let me give you just a few examples of what these unelected bureaucrats are spending your hard-earned money on. $4.8 million went to Ukraine's Public Affairs Office in Kiev to fund social media influencers. Instead of protecting our own border, $2.1 million was sent to Paraguay to enhance their border security. USAID also funded a group of Ukrainian women-led designers to travel to the Paris fashion show. I don't know about you, but I'd imagine Ukrainian women have more important things to worry about than appearing in the Paris fashion show. USAID spent $2 million on transgender surgeries, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming care in Guatemala. $3 million was spent to promote girl-centric climate action in Brazil. And I'd love to picture what a conversation about girl-centered climate action looks like. It's like, hey, Barbie, do you know what girl-centered climate change is? Since when do we believe arguments need to be tailored for girls to understand? How insulting to women at large that they think there are special arguments for girls to understand that are different than boys. $25,000 to fund a transgender opera in Colombia. Was nobody in Colombia willing to buy a ticket? USAID spent $32,000 in Peru to create a comic featuring a trans hero to address social and mental health issues. What does that have to do with diplomacy? $20,000 to fund a DEI program for a drag theater in Ecuador. $20 million was spent to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. USAID spent $6 million to promote a project boosting sustainable tourism in Egypt. I guess the U.S. is now the travel agent for the entire world since they spent $50 million on Tunisia's tourism. even though it's already one of the most visited countries in Africa. USAID gave $87.9 million to help Afghans farm, and incidentally, farm poppy, the plant from which opium is extracted. As of 2021, Afghanistan supplied 90% of the world's heroin. I thought the saying in the U.S. was just say no to drugs. How about we just say no to wasteful foreign aid? $70,000 for a live musical event to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in Ireland. State Department paid $330,000 to compile a disinformation index to blacklist conservative media outlets. USAID funneled over $54 million to EcoHealth Alliance, funding the very organization linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disgraceful. $15 million was awarded to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to distribute oral contraceptives and condoms. There's still a $3 billion fund for Afghan reconstruction that I've tried to take that money to pay for other things that the government is spending money on, and yet there's been resistance by the other side to deplete that fund and say, we're done funding things in Afghanistan. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These are taxpayer dollars being used to fund ideologically misguided, ineffective, and unnecessary projects, thanks to the blundering bureaucracy, while our own citizens struggle to put food on the table. This is not what our government was designed to do. The U.S. government is not a charity, and it should not be doling out cash to foreign organizations, some of which actively oppose the United States with no oversight. And we don't have the money to give. We're borrowing the money we send. We need to ask a simple question. Why are we borrowing money to send money overseas? Even if USAID eliminated the crazy left-wing grants for trans operas, it still makes no sense to borrow money to then turn around and send it overseas. Borrowing money to send as charity is like the worker who has no money left after paying for their food, rent, and gas, saying, oh, well, I see this homeless person, I have such great sympathy. I'll go to the bank and I'll borrow $1,000 to give to this person. That's what we are doing. We can't pay for our own, and we are borrowing the money we send overseas. That money could be used to pay down our $36 trillion debt and take care of the American people, the very people who actually pay these taxes in the first place. It's time for a real change. America should not continue to be the world's piggy bank. It's time to end the waste of foreign aid and end the bureaucracy and for once do what's right by the American taxpayer. With that, I recognize the ranking member for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, these are taxpayer dollars going to projects that don't advance U.S. interests and, in some cases, aren't even well received by the communities they're supposed to help. Now let's talk about the bigger picture. The U.S. government is $36 trillion in debt, and we're borrowing money just to fund these overseas projects. We're not even paying for this stuff ourselves. We're borrowing money from future generations just to send it out the door. Senator Paul made a powerful comparison. Imagine a person who has no money left after paying for their own essentials. They then decide to borrow $1,000 to give to a homeless person. That's essentially what the U.S. government is doing. We're borrowing money to send it overseas, and meanwhile, Americans are struggling to make ends meet. This isn't charity, it's reckless spending with no real oversight. We need to ask ourselves, why are we borrowing money to send it abroad when we can't even pay our own bills? It's clear that the current system isn't working. USAID and other federal agencies are wasting taxpayer dollars on projects that don't benefit the American people and sometimes even undermine our values. We can't keep borrowing money to fund these misguided programs. It's time for a change. Let's stop being the world's piggy bank and focus on taking care of our own people first. The U.S. government needs to end the wasteful spending, cut the bureaucracy, and do what's right for the American taxpayer. If you agree, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay updated on this issue and more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.